Hi, I'm Richard Haggart. I play Glenn, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on Australia's favourite drama, Neighbours, each weeknight at 7 on the Entertainment Network, Channel 10.
This is the 10 Eyewitness News, second edition, with Eric Walters.
Good evening. Allied forces are reported to have reached the outskirts of Kuwait City. Army commanders say they're preparing to take on Iraqi positions within the capital. Military specialists are still unsure why there's been little resistance so far to the ground offensive. There have been reports that the Republican Guard are on the move, and one source claims an Allied warship was attacked with a Silkworm missile. But first, latest reports from the ground offensive say more than 14,000 Iraqi soldiers have been captured or given themselves up to coalition forces.
The 2nd Marine Division's push into Kuwait began before the sun came up. By the time it was daylight, shortly after 6, the Marines were inside Iraqi-occupied Kuwait. As the convoy ground through the desert, rain started to fall. There was concern about Iraqi chemical weapons.
Possible chemical agents.
But generally, the Leathernecks sped into Kuwait without meeting any Iraqi resistance. As they drove along, smoke and fires from the hundreds of oil fields set alight by Iraqi troops came into view. Occasionally, the Marines traded fire with scattered Iraqi positions. Marine engineers threw out explosive line charges to detonate mines. But it wasn't all smooth going. The convoy ground to a halt after one of the Marine Humvees hit a mine. The concussion knocked one Marine out for a second.
I think I was unconscious. The next thing I knew, I was running, and I just fell down on the deck, and my head was hurting extremely.
The convoy slowly began rolling again, passing by abandoned Iraqi anti-aircraft emplacements and armored vehicles scorched by the relentless air war. Then a scene that amazed even the Marines, lines of hundreds of Iraqi soldiers surrendering.
Are we bad? Are we bad?
The Iraqi POWs marched with their hands up, trudging past burning oil fields and abandoned defensive positions. Not all the Marines believed it would continue to be that easy.
A little easier than I thought it would be. You know, I'd heard a lot of optimistic reports, but I'm not exactly an optimist at times, so I was real pleased with how it went.
But to their amazement, as the day wore on, it did continue to be that easy, as more and more Iraqis decided not to fight. Allied commanders, though, are warning against premature optimism for two basic reasons. One, they point out Iraq's elite Republican Guard units, for the most part, have not entered the battle yet, and they say the worst may be yet to come in what could be house-to-house fighting in Kuwait City.
Meanwhile, Saddam Hussein, speaking on Baghdad radio, claimed the Allied offensive was a failure. This report has been subject to Iraqi censorship.
Baghdad came to a halt for Saddam Hussein's speech. It was an emotional address condemning the Allies for launching an offensive after Iraq had accepted the Soviet peace initiative. Saddam appealed to Iraqis to fight with what he called faith and dignity. He said the offensive was a treacherous, inhuman crime. God, he said, would help Iraq repulse the aggression. The speech had the effect he desired on at least some of his listeners.
I don't like the language of the English, but Bush is a criminal of the war.
Later, as smoke drifted across the skyline of the Iraqi capital from bomb sites and from other fires I'm not allowed to describe, Baghdad Radio issued a military communique. It said that 6 Iraqi divisions had been attacked, but the offensive, it said, had been foiled. Once again, the communique claimed the Allies had been left wading in their own blood. It said there'd been a two-pronged attack against the walls of Iraqi defensive positions and within the positions themselves. There'd been more big air raids before the announcement that the offensive had started. Many people in Baghdad who've gone through night after night of bombing have convinced themselves that the Allies never wanted peace. The raids, and now they say the ground war, are aimed at crippling Iraq and destroying Saddam Hussein.
Allied leaders say the ground war is the beginning of the end for President Hussein. They say even though Hussein is defiant, the advance is progressing better than expected.
President Bush attended a pre-dawn briefing on the war before going to church in Washington, joined by most of his cabinet. The service ended with a hymn, "Give peace, O God, give peace," while outside police dispersed a small band of protesters and the Defence Secretary gave a war update.
It's safe to say it's gone better than expected, but this is only the first day. We still have a long ways to go, and I'd rather be cautious than overly optimistic.
British troops who are deeply involved in the action received unusual public support from Queen Elizabeth.
I hope that we can unite in praying that their success will be as swift as it is certain.
While here in the United States, people seem to be determined not to be swept up by the euphoria resulting from what appear to be early victories. Some smashed cars in Iraqi colours, some prayed, and all tried to forget the dangers.
During the day, I'm pretty busy. I work and with the kids and all, but it affects me the most at night.
Ken Burslam, 10 Eyewitness News.
Australian military specialists have given Prime Minister Hawke a detailed assessment of the war. Mr. Hawke says the invasion is going better than he expected.
The new Maritime Command headquarters in Sydney is the link with our naval task force in the Gulf. Today, Prime Minister Hawke officially opened it, although it's been operational since last August, the month Iraq invaded Kuwait.
From the outset, the headquarters have been tested by the very many operational demands placed on it by our deployment in the Gulf.
HMS Brisbane is currently in an unspecified sector of the Northern Gulf. It's not yet taken part in supporting the ground war. But defence sources say with its 2 5-inch guns, it's the more likely of our ships to be used in shore bombardment, a role it played in Vietnam. But Prime Minister Hawke is optimistic the war will be over soon, within weeks.
All the reports of success seem well-founded, and if anything, the ground offensive is going even better than was expected.
An end of the war can't come quickly enough for Qantas. The airline says it may have to cut another 2,000 jobs on top of the 500 already announced because of the soaring cost of aviation fuel since the outbreak of hostilities. Paul Mongiorno, 10 Eyewitness News.
Police in Melbourne have arrested scores of people after a peace protest outside Defence Department headquarters.
Defence personnel arriving for work were confronted by a small but stubborn band of protesters.
Just gently. Gently, gently.
The demonstrators blocked the main entrance to the Defence building. Some staff managed to push their way in, while others used cars to break the blockade. Eventually, police were called and arrests followed. 30 people were taken into custody, most charged with prohibiting access to a Commonwealth building. The protesters say they will continue to blockade Defence headquarters until a peaceful resolution is reached in the Gulf. At Melbourne University, protesters disrupted Orientation Day ceremonies, staging their own ground offensive with water pistols. Despite the watery onslaught, the University Vice-Chancellor soldiered on with his speech.
In minimum time and good luck. And be careful out there.
And in Sydney, protesters staged a die-in outside the US consulate. The quiet die-in soon turned into a full-scale rowdy protest. Sean